بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Welcome back everyone to our penultimate class inshallah, in which we are getting very close to concluding this entire chapter of marriage and divorce. So what's left for us to talk about under spousal support is the sort of assistance that would happen in the house if a wife is used to having assistant, whether they be maid or cleaning people, a nurse, an au pair, all those type of concepts, all those type of things. It's all under one rubric. In the text, it's listed as a servant. So anybody that's helping out, anything that she's used to, anything that's appropriate to her, that's also an obligation for the husband to provide. And we'll get into the details of that. Now, related to that, or sort of a subsequent discussion point, is what happens if the husband unfortunately is not able to provide that or all of the things that we talked about in the previous class. A lack of provision in general could be a divorceable offense. That's the bottom line, and that's what I want you to understand from this. Of course, there'll be details, and even though it's like one or two lines, we're actually going to spend quite a bit of time, inshallah, looking at the hashiyah and looking at the considerations of what would determine a divorceable offense. Is the man withholding, but he can? On itself, that's not divorceable because she has recourse to the courts. In the traditional fiqh, that is. If the man can't, and that's something that she's used to, it is a divorceable offense, meaning that she has the right to divorce. In this case, it's actually not a talaq, it's a fasakh, it's an annulment of the marriage, and therefore that does not affect the number of divorces. And remember, way back when we talked about this, there are different types of severing the marriage. Divorce is one of them, male-initiated divorce. Then there's the khula, which is a woman-initiated, quote-unquote, divorce. And then there's the fasakh, which is the annulment. And all of them have different categories in Islamic law and then different implications. And then we will begin the discussion of custody. And then tomorrow we will finish the subject of custody. We'll begin it in the sense that I'll just introduce the concept of custody and some broad terms about that. And then in tomorrow's lecture, inshallah, we wrap up, we will actually finish the section on custody. So those are the main points we'll talk about, and we'll begin our discussion, inshallah, in the next clip. So we begin the way we always begin these courses, which is to turn to the text of our beloved Qadi Abu Shuja' radiallahu anhu. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. وإن كانت ممن يخدم مثلها فعليه إخدامها، وإن أعصر بنفقتها فلها فسخ النكاح، وكذلك إن أعصر بالصداق قبل الدخول. فصل في الحضانة. وإذا فارق الرجل زوجته وله منها ولد فهي أحق بحضانته إلى 7 سنين. And that's where we're going to stop. So it's sometimes it baffles when I read it. It's like, oh, it's only 2 sentences, but yeah, subhanAllah, we got to unpack all of that. So he says, Qadi Abu Shuja' radiallahu anhu says, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him and may we benefit from his knowledge in this world and in the next. If someone such as her, typically, this is in the middle of the spousal support section. If someone, just picking up right where we left off yesterday, if someone such as her typically has servants, then she is provided with a servant. If he is unable to provide for future upkeep, she may ask a judge to annul the marriage, hence a fasakh, and that's a good translation, not a divorce. Because when you say divorce, talaq, it means something else. She may do the same if he is unable to provide the marriage payment, meaning the mahar, prior to consummation. Custody. If a man separates from his wife and they have an infant here is a correct translation because the word is walad. And in the context of marriage and children, al-walad is both the boy and the girl. So it's not al-walad here doesn't mean son, it means infant, child. If a man separates from his wife and they have an infant, she has the most right to the infant's custody until he or she is 7 lunar years old. Okay, let me look at the book of Adillah, which is unfortunately not how many people teach fiqh, but alhamdulillah, this is how I was taught fiqh. And I think I might have mentioned this before, but the adillah are important because every single sentence in the text is taken from a dalil. And sometimes the verbiage of the text itself is actually a restatement of a hadith or a partial hadith or a verse or words from the verse of the Quran, etc. So I know that I don't test you on the dalil because I think it's just too much right now, but it's important that your ears get used to hearing, yes, every single sentence of fiqh is backed up by some kind of dalil. When you get into the bigger books of fiqh on your own, inshallah, and you further your studies, that will become abundantly clear. And then you'll get to the point where you're reading the dalil only and then being able to understand the law. So that's kind of the mental progression that one goes through. Allah, 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 Allah. Okay, so the first dalil, about not being able to pay the husband. So this is a hadith that's narrated in Dar al-Qutni on the authority of Abi Hurairah radiallahu anhu, who said, أن النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم قال في الرجل لا يجد ما ينفق على امرأته يفرق بينهما. So that the man who's not able to spend on his wife, then they are separated. يفرق بينهما يعني مبني المجهول, يعني meaning they are made to separate, i.e. the courts, the mufti or qadi, or the qadi rather, intercedes. Emphasizing that it's a fasq, it's an annulment, not a divorce. A divorce is the man tells his wife, anti taliq, as we took, and based on that is the iddah, and all of that kind of stuff. And it counts as one divorce. There's always going to be an iddah, but in this case, it's just an annulment, and therefore it does not impact the number of divorces. We also have the hadith that's narrated in Abi Dawood and others on the authority of Amr ibn Shu'aib, on the authority of his father, on the authority of his grandfather radiallahu anhu ajma'in, that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam جاءته امرأة فقالت يا رسول الله إن ابني هذا كان بطني له وعاء وثدي له سقاء وحجري له حواء وأن أباه طلقني وأراد أن ينزعه مني فقال لها رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم أنت أحق به ما لم تنكحي. A woman came to complain to the Prophet ﷺ, and she said, this child of mine, my stomach was his shelter, my breast was his place of nursing, and my lap or my embraces gave him protection, and my husband divorced me and he wants to take the child from me. And the Prophet ﷺ told her, you have a right to the child as long as you do not remarry. Okay, that's the dalil for the portion of the Hadana section that we're going to take, and the rest will come in tomorrow's lecture, inshallah. Now we get the big guns. We begin our discussion, inshallah. Okay, going back to spousal support. So, he says, rahimahullah, if someone such as her typically has servants, then she is provided with a servant. So, a lot of this is going to be culturally understood. If a woman like her, meaning someone of her social class, her social standing, her sisters, her cousins, her neighbors, etc., are used to having some type of assistance in the house. An easy way to determine that is what happened in the house of her father. How did she grow up? When she was married, did she have that kind of setup? Again, marriage in general is supposed to be a horizontal move for the woman. So again, all of the things that we're talking about are the default setting. If there's an arrangement between the husband and the wife, khalas. And either, when people marry up or marry down financially, there are going to be implications plus or minus. And if that's here I'm being real, people do marry up, unfortunately that's their motivation, even though that's not supposed to be their motivation. It's another topic altogether. But if a woman finds a man that she is attracted to, is a good man, a godly man, a saintly man, and his means are tight, but she comes from a super wealthy family and she's okay with that, that's fine. So we're not saying that this is an obligation, meaning he has to go out and start peddling, drugs or something to provide. No, we're saying that this is the default setting. This is what is expected. When does the default setting kick in and when does that become an issue for us? Unfortunately, when there's a problem in the marriage and a potential fight, dispute that could lead to a divorce, and you have to bring in a third party to arbitrate, like the courts or an imam or something like that, that's when we are going to determine. And if there is lack of things that are default setted to obligation, if those things are not provided, then there could be financial penalties on the man for that. So that's why we have to understand this fiqh. Of course, in real life, with a real couple, of course, there's going to be arrangements, because some of these things, in the modern world are almost impossible to provide financially. So there has to be an understanding. And when we counsel young people to get married in a real life situation, you have to counsel them to be realistic. But here we need to learn the default is that the concept of marriage is supposed to be a horizontal move for the lady. So if she's used to having somebody comes in to the house twice a week for me, I'm used to that, then the man has to provide that. Provide the means for that. Provide either the money for that, and she can hire somebody whom he approves, or if her parents are elderly and she inherits the help, like, I want to come to your new house and help you, then again, as long as the husband is not objecting to that person, then he has to be able to provide for that. So that's what he means by if someone as her typically has servants. Now, interestingly, he says, if a woman such as her also, maybe the woman, her constitution is different. Maybe she's, not like a go-getter type of person, but she's fragile. I don't mean to be condescending, but I mean, some people, men can be like that too, but in this context, we're talking about women. And, she's just not able to do stuff with her hands in the house. Maybe then you also have to provide her, because a woman like that needs help. She can't do it all on her own. If a woman has a child, some women, I remember like my grandmother, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on her, my maternal grandmother, she was like a tank. That's how I always perceived her. Nonna could do anything. I saw her do some pretty crazy things when I used to come to Egypt as a child. She could handle, anybody, right? Some women can't do that. Some women, they have a child and it's like the end, woe is me, I can't handle it, and they get into postpartum depression. I'm not saying this condescendingly, but that happens. Somebody like that needs help. And I deal with a lot of women who have new mothers, and they're on the edge of getting into the postpartum depression thing. And I tell the husband, you got to get her some help. She's going to break down like this. Even I say that. So I don't mean in a condescending way. Allah have mercy on the person that knows the limit of themselves. So when he says a woman like her, it's not just what she's used to, but it's also if she herself needs help. Let me pick this up in the next clip, inshallah. So we're commenting on this line in the text, a woman like her, it typically has help or servants, then it's obligation for the man to provide that. So that could come and go. For another example, just to make, I feel like maybe I was too condescending. I don't want to be interpreted as being condescending, even though that's not my intention. Let's say, God forbid, the woman gets sick. Okay, well, if she gets sick and she's like the go-getter type of person, but now she's sick, she was in an accident, God forbid, or something like that, my man has to provide for the medical care, also has to provide for the help. The default setting is the man provides the finances, and then the woman provides the tarbiyah, provides the rearing of the children and conducts the inside of the house. She's in charge of that. So if something temporarily or permanently prevents that, then the man is obligated to provide for that, because it's not expected that the man is going to start to do that. Default. Now, in normal situations, of course, every man is going to help out with the diapers, with the dishes, with the cleaning, and that's different. That's normal day to day. He's not saying, or the fiqh is not saying, or Islam is not saying a man is not allowed to do that, it's beneath him. La, he will, but the default setting is he's out hustling, and then he's going to come back and he's just like exhausted from the hustle. So therefore, the inside of the house is the woman's domain. So if the woman needs help in maintaining that domain, then the man is going to have to provide that help, for her. Now, interestingly, this brings up another kind of set of considerations. The servant, let's say it's a live-in nurse, au pair, maid, or something like that. Somebody that's always going to be there. Let's say it's not somebody that's just going to come a couple hours, a couple times a week. In that case, the man has to make sure that that person has clothes, food, the servant, that is the maid servant help, has clothes, food, place to sleep and rest, which means the basic condiments that go, like a mattress to sleep, bathroom facility, basic products, clothes to cover themselves with, that is appropriate of that type of person. So there are working clothes. Remember way back when we talked about Salatul Istisqa, the rain prayer that we do when there's a drought. We said that one of the unique features of that prayer is that when we, after the 3 days of fasting and we go out for the salah itself, we go in our work clothes. So there is a concept of work clothes. Like I put on my thobe and my cap when I teach because that's, for me, a minimal level of appropriateness. I mean, ideally I would be wearing my jubba and my imma, but sometimes where I record, the room is hot, or it's just a lot to go on, and then I got to get the microphone. So this is like a minimal level of work clothes. But I don't, I don't wake up like this. Obviously, I don't go to sleep like this. And I have home clothes or work clothes or sleep clothes. So there are different types of clothing, and then the fiqh acknowledges that. So in that case, in the rain prayer, we go out in our work clothes. The clothes, not our, as we say in English, not our Sunday best, or I guess maybe more appropriately, our Jummah best. Because Jummah, you're supposed to dress nicely. So the servant type of person is going to wear work clothes. And usually what I have observed when people come and work in the house, they will obviously bring a change of clothes with them, especially if they're just coming for a day or two, because they're going to roll up and get dirty and get on their knees and clean this and sweep that and trash. And then before they leave, they'll freshen up, put on their outside clothes, and then they'll go out. So the work clothes, the clothes that are worn in the house, that's the type of clothes that the man also has to provide. So when you're paying for somebody, you're not only paying, okay, how much does this person cost an hour? You have to give that person the tools they need to do their job. So it's a little bit more than simply just, quote unquote, providing for that person. It's providing for that person and the associated things that goes with that. Okay, and then he says, rahimahullah, if he is unable to provide for future upkeep. So remember that this is a concluding sentence, not of the servant sentence, but of all of the previous sentences. So providing for the woman's home, her food and her kiswa, all of the things that we've talked about, and the servant if she needs that. If he is unable to do that, she may ask the judge to annul the marriage. So that could be a divorceable offense. Now, remember we said there are two types of men. There's the men who can, the musir, and then the one who can't, and mu'sir, the one who has difficulty. The musir, the one who is wealthy, is not providing. She doesn't automatically ask for the annulment, but she asks for the court or the judge to impose on the man the financial penalty, or forces the man or takes from the man's estate to provide for those things, because there is a option other than the annulment to receive the things that she's due. So that's how serious these things are, that if a man who can does not provide in an Islamic legal environment, the court has the power then to impose that. The state has that power to impose that. No, you have to provide that type of upkeep and welfare for your women, your wife and your children. If the man, however, is not well off, then she has the right to ask for a divorce. She has the right to ask for an annulment. So why? Because it's considered a darar. It's considered a harm. So when we talk about what are divorceable offenses, we learn in the fiqh, in the broad fiqh of Islam, and this is most explicitly articulated in the books of Maliki fiqh, that the woman can seek a divorce / annulment للضرر, for harm, financial harm, physical harm, emotional harm. Even if a man was rude to his wife, cussed at his wife, criticized her, called her you're a this, or bad names, and said the same about her family or something like that, that in itself is a divorceable offense, an annulment offense actually. She can go to the court and say and bear witness that my husband did 1, 2, 3, and then the man can divorce. And of course, we don't want to be loose with divorce, because we don't want to. So in the real life, then that's a theory. Now let me tell you about the real life. In the real life situation, in the fatwa environment that I've been around, we do everything possible to keep people together. This is when you're going to take from all madhahib and unique ijtihadi opinions in the past. You're going to take all of that stuff to keep the people together, to keep the couple together, especially if there are children. a man comes, for example, this is just a little bit of a tangent, or a woman comes, my husband divorced me 3 times and blah, blah, blah. We don't just take that at face value. We say, oh, bring them in, let him come. He comes. Where were you in the house when this happened? He said, I was in the bathroom and I yelled it. And then I said to the wife, was he in the bathroom? No, he was in the kitchen. So I interpret that as he was so angry he didn't know where he was. What day did this happen? This happened last Wednesday. She's like, no, this happened on Monday. He didn't even know what day it was. Was this in the morning or the night? Was this before Salat al-Dhuhr or after Salat al-Asr? You kind of ask those type of questions to say, oh, you know what? You were actually angry. So that was a statement out of anger. It wasn't followed by the intention. We'll make it one divorce that's revocable. Mathalan, for example. Of course, you can't take what I'm saying and go apply it. This has to be determined in a real life situation. But I'm retelling you these stories of things I have witnessed and been involved with, so you see the extent that we go to keep people together. But in my experience as well, if things are that bad, I have had very little fortune, and maybe this is just a limitation of me, and Lord knows I'm limited. When things are that bad, usually it's very hard to keep them together. Because people don't come for a religious opinion, a religious legal opinion. My experience is early enough in the problem. They kind of leave that to the very end. And by that time, the relationship has deteriorated so much it's almost impossible. Which is why we have the fiqh that guides us. Says, okay, what is if there's harm, then we're going to be able to annul the marriage. So if the man does not provide the things he's supposed to provide, if he doesn't provide the food and its associated things, if he doesn't provide the clothes and the associated things, if he doesn't provide a home and its associated things like space, furniture, the basic beauty products that a woman would need, if he doesn't provide servants or service or help in the house, and he's supposed to, and its associated things, and if he's wealthy, then the court/state would impose on him a financial penalty and coerce him to pay for those things, and therefore the initial complaint of the woman is satisfied because she's going to get those things. However, if the man can't, and he's supposed to provide those things, and he's just fallen on really hard times, unfortunately, that is a separational offense, a divorceable offense, and becomes an annulment. So that's much broader, I think, than what people think about marriage and divorce, and it's important that you keep those things in mind when you're studying the fiqh. Also, well, I ran out of time. Let me pick up final thoughts on this in the next clip, inshallah. Related to this topic that we were talking about, man not keeping up, is that if a woman goes to the courts to complain, she can't complain about something that happened in the past. It has to be about something that's ongoing now. So one of the conditions, so from the conditions point of view, a woman going to the court to complain and there's an annulment. The first condition is that the man has to be not wealthy. Because if he's wealthy, then we don't have to annul, we can coerce the payment. Number 2 is that it has to be the core upkeep things. Nafaqah, like the payments, the core clothes and stuff like that. I might have misspoken in the previous clip to say it's associated things. If he's providing basic food and basic clothes, then that's not going to be a divorceable offense. Number 3 is that he's withholding the payment to her. Number 4 is that he's refusing payment that he is able to pay. And then lastly, it's payment, withholding of payment and upkeep now, not in the past. Because if it was something in the past, like 5 years ago, the judge would be like, where were you 5 years ago? Why did you bring this to our attention now? Where was the complaint or the attempt to complain? Do you have evidence that you emailed us and we lost the email or something? It can't be, there's no retroactive retribution in that case. If all of those 5 things are fulfilled, or their opposites are not fulfilled, then therefore that can be an annulment, a fasakh, and as we said, it doesn't count towards one of the divorces. Now, of course, when something like this happens in a court situation, the judge has to investigate, or the court has to send out somebody to investigate to establish that. After, Al-Bayjuri gives like a little scenario. I'm not going to read it all, but just sort of give you an idea of how the procedure would happen. And then after that, if it's been established, then the judge gives the man 3 days to rectify the situation. So if he can't rectify the situation, then his inability would have been established, and then the judge would grant the fasakh, and it does not diminish from the number of divorces. Then lastly, he says, she may do the same if he is unable to provide the mahar, the marriage payment, prior to consummation. So the mahar is a rukn, is an obligatory, cardinal, integral of the marriage contract, and it is a dain, it is a debt that is in the person of the dhimma, the person of the husband, until he pays it. So even if he doesn't pay it now, he has to pay it. Even if they get divorced and he had not paid it, he still has to pay it. It has to be paid unless she allows before the consummation of the marriage. So if he did not pay it in full before the consummation of the marriage, and there is no agreement for a delay, then that also is a divorceable offense, in which case she would be a woman who is divorced before the consummation of marriage. Okay, the next section is the section of al-hadana, which is custody, which obviously is super important because, when there are children involved, we need to understand who gets to take care of who. Of course, the scenario could be boys only, girls only, or singular, or a mix of boys and girls. And that's important because when they're beyond 7, there's going to be a default assumption that the boys will go with the husband, the girls would go with the woman. If they're mixed, then they can be chosen. It's preferable that the children not be split from the family. But unfortunately, custody isn't important. Basically, before 7 years of age, the children are going to be with the mother, because all calendar considerations and time consideration in the Sharia are lunar years, of course, and because she is the one that's taking care of them. And this is here where we again are reminded of the default ruling, or the default setting of the marriage relationships and responsibilities, is that the man is providing financial means. So all the stuff we just talked about, the man is providing money for that stuff. He doesn't necessarily have to go out and get that stuff, but he has to at least, at a bare minimum, provide the money, and then the woman, so it's like, here's your allowance for the month or for the house or whatever, and then you can go do it, or he can go get it himself. But I'm just saying, the minimum is that he's providing that, and then the woman is responsible for the upkeep of the house and the children. So the tarbiyah of the children, the rearing them, feeding them, teaching them the basic skill sets is important, which is why taking care of our women in society is of the utmost importance, because as we say, they are the first school. The first school of the child is going to be the mother, not the father. So up until when they are 7, which is kind of the age when they might be start to going to school and discerning and things like that, it's incumbent that they, unless she remarries, as the hadith showed us, it's incumbent that they stay with the mother for those purposes. So he says, rahimahullah, if a man separates from his wife, they have an infant, boy or girl, she has the most right to the infant's custody until she is 7, until the child is 7 lunar years. The child then chooses between the parents. I only read that line. Until he is 7 lunar years. Now, in those 7 lunar years and less, if the mother refuses or there's incapacity, then the next best thing is the woman, the wife's mother, meaning the child's grandmother. So we're always going to default on the side of the mother for those first lunar years until the children are over 7 years of age. Included in this, by the way, are somebody who's old and he says majnoon, or crazy. So if you're taking care of somebody, an elderly parent or an elderly person, it would also, the discussion of that will also be, it's a secondary discussion, but it also takes place in this section of fiqh, of custody. So, who's going to get custody of this older person that we're taking care of? It could be an older child, okay, as we said, in a rare scenario in which, very young parents, and obviously the parents are always going to be older than the child, but the child is considered older but majnoon, so they're not able to take care of themselves. So the idea is Who takes care of people that can't take care of themselves? Usually that's the children, but sometimes it could be an older person or a sick person. So that's like a second layer. You kind of have to read through the hashia, the different hawashi, to ascertain that that's what's going on. If the children are boys only, and the woman refuses, then they will, before the 7, then they will go to the husband. Taking care of the child is like the same stuff we've talked about before. Taking care of food and clothes. If they need assistance, if somebody's usually in the house to help them out, if they're learning at a very young age, like the Quran, if they have a tutor or something, or an Arabic tutor or something like that, that's the stuff that needs to happen during that time. So there has to be finances for that. So the man has to pay for those things. I mean, the man has to pay for his children, as we talked about earlier. And then, so that's one setup. That's the first setup that he talks about, is before 7 years. After the 7 years, he's going to get into, they choose, and then after that, he talks about the custodian, the person who's going to take care of them, is important. So, and that's where there's going to be a lot of interesting fiqh, because you can't give the child to somebody who's not considered upright or not a Muslim. If it's a Muslim child, there can be danger in that, danger on their well-being, their spiritual well-being, or their physical well-being. So we'll get into the discussions of all of that. I kind of feel maybe I could have done a little bit more in this class, but since we have one more lecture, I might as well punt the details of that to then. One thing just to back up for a little bit about the upkeep and the support section of the marriage and divorce sub-chapters or sections that we've talked about. I think this is one of the most important ones. And the reason is, it's one of those times where you're reading about practical things in direct relation to the theory behind them. So one of the things that Al-Bayjuri says, for example, is like servants, I think he was quoting Ash-Shirbini or maybe Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari, one of them, rahimahumullah, that servants, pants, sarawil, are not considered normal clothes for servants. And then Al-Bayjuri said, well, that was the urf, that was the custom then. Now that's the opposite. They all wear pants. So you have to provide pants for the servants that are going to live with you. So the reading that section is very, very important. And it's one of those things that you will probably, it's one of the sections that I go back to frequently, because unfortunately when people have, like I said, when they have a conflict, they come to you when it's too late. And that gives you a sense of how you apply the fiqh. We'll put a pin in it here, and we'll save the rest of the discussion for tomorrow. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam, wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa maulana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah, in today's class, our penultimate lecture, we were able to finish the discussion of support. We began today's lecture with the discussion of if a woman is usually used to having help in the house, or a woman like her is somebody that is expected to have help, then it's an obligation for the man to provide that help. When we talk about providing help, we're talking about the help and then the associated things with the help, especially if somebody's a live-in person, the clothes, the food, the place to sleep and rest, etc. And if a man cannot provide any of these supports, not just the help, but all of the other things we talked about in yesterday's lecture, then there are two considerations. If the man is wealthy and the man is poor. If the man is wealthy, then the woman makes a complaint to the court, and then the court, after determining the fact that he's withholding, imposes on him financial penalties and coerces the man to pay for those services. Why? Because the man has recourse to that, and that's what the complaint is. The legal complaint here is the woman is not getting what is owed her. So then, if the man is wealthy, we are able to determine that. However, if the man is not wealthy and unfortunately poor and unable to, then that becomes a divorceable offense because there is harm that is involved. However, it's not a divorce, it is an annulment, a fasakh. And we said that the annulment is one of the ways that a marriage is undone, but the fasakh, in the fasakh situation, the woman, it doesn't count as one of the 3 divorces. In addition, if a man does not pay the dowry to the woman before the consummation of marriage, without a prior agreement between the two, of course, then that's also a divorceable offense. She's able to divorce him or to annul the marriage. And then we began the discussion very, very simply about custody. And custody is very important because usually when there are people that are married, usually, not always, there are children involved. The general rule is before 7 lunar years, the children are going to remain with the mother, and then therefore the husband is going to make sure that he's paying for what those children need in that time period, food, medicine, if there's some kind of instruction, something like that. And if the mother is not available or refuses for whatever reason, then they would go to her mother. So it's on the maternal side, unless the children are boys, in which case it would revert to the father in the case in which she refuses. But the details of that we'll save for tomorrow's lecture, in which we'll get into that and also conclude this chapter and this course. والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.